What's up everybody, Commander Sanctum here, and today we have a brand new deck tech using Ketramose, the New Dawn. Ketramose is a 4/4 god for 1 white black that has Menace, Lifelink, and Indestructible. Ketramose also can't attack or block unless there are 7 or more cards in exile, and whenever 1 or more cards are put into exile from the graveyard or the battlefield during your turn, you draw a card and lose a life. Ketramose's exile effect in particular is what intrigued me. Every time I see an ability like that, one that cares about things exiling from the battlefield, one of my favorite themes comes to mind: Astral Slide. Astral Slide and Astral Drift are both cards that care about cycling. Whenever a card is cycled, you get to essentially flicker a creature out until the end step. Since flickering is just a fancy term for exiling, doing this on your turn would trigger Ketramose's ability, letting you draw a card. One of the biggest downsides of cycling cards is that you stay at parity in number of cards in your hand. Since we now have Ketramose that will draw you a card, it instead will turn into card advantage. This deck tech will be an Astral Slide deck, one that focuses on the Astral enchantments and includes a bunch of cycling cards to trigger them. With that, let's get into the card highlights. Having already discussed the 2 main cards of the deck, Astral Slide and Astral Drift, let's get into some other cycling payoff cards that also have cycling themselves. Since we want to make sure the deck will still function at least somewhat without the Astral enchantments, we need more cards that trigger off cycling to give us a benefit. For instance, Decree of Justice and Valor's Flagship both generate us tokens whenever we cycle them, while Valiant Rescuer gives us a token whenever we cycle another card. Making tokens can be an effective way to make sure we can stay in the game until we get the Astral engine online. Archfiend of Ifnir is probably the best cycling payoff card, outside of the Astrals, as it's a great way to keep all of your opponent's boards in check. Drannith Healer and Flourishing Fox aren't quite as good, but gaining life or making a bigger creature has its benefits. While the cycling payoff is what we really want from these, especially in terms of the Archfiend, the fact that they have cycling themselves can be very beneficial in those situations where you have Astral Slide online and need to slide out a creature. We also have a number of creatures that temporarily become bigger whenever you cycle a creature. Grizzly Survivor, Horror of the Broken Lands, and Stoic Champion all gain temporary buffs of 2 power and a variable toughness whenever you cycle a card, making them very formidable attackers or even blockers. These cards can be great ways to close out the game if you're able to cycle enough cards in a turn. And hey, the Horror even has cycling itself, which will come in very handy in most situations, particularly since he has such a high CMC to begin with. Faith of the Devoted is a great way to end the game in a cycling deck, letting you pay 1 to drain 2 life from each opponent every time you cycle a card. Joel Grant gets a +1/+1 counter on her whenever you cycle a card, but really shines in the fact that she gives your historic spells cycling as well. This means that any artifacts you may have in your hand turn into cyclers as well, greatly increasing the pool of cycling effects in the deck. Ruthless Sniper is admittedly a bit of a meh card with its ability, but can be a good way to chip away at an indestructible creature, or start taking out an army of 1/1s. Now for the meat of the deck, the straight up cyclers. There are a decent number of cards with cycling on them, so we'll want to mostly choose ones that are also playable if cast normally. To start out with, we have a few that provide protection in one shape or another. Angel Song is a typical fog spell that can be essential if you're being attacked by a huge army. Jeru's Resolve is a great way to protect one creature, even potentially one of your opponents if you find yourself in a situation where an opponent blocking another opponent's creature would be advantageous. Akroma's Blessing is a great way to get your board of creatures in on an opponent, especially one playing a monocolored deck, or protect them from damage-based board wipes, like Blasphemous Act. There are also a number of removal spells that have cycling, some of which are better than others. Cast Out is one of the better ones, letting you put a non-land permanent in the bag, so to speak. This is a great way to take care of those non-creature permanents your opponents have that are especially pesky, and even triggers Ketramose's ability to boot. Expunge and Gallant Strike are situational creature removal, with Gallant requiring a creature with toughness 4 or greater, and Expunge requiring it to be a non-artifact, non-black creature. Even with these requirements, the fact that the cards have dual purpose for us is what makes them handy in the deck. We also have some generic utility cards that have cycling. Razaketh's Right is one of the better ones, especially since we're going to be reliant on the Astral enchantments. This will be great to use normally to fetch an Astral when we don't have it, while its cycling ability will be more useful when we already have one on the battlefield. Unearth is great reanimation for our cycling payoff creatures that may have died, and Fade from Memory is useful to help prevent others from doing any graveyard shenanigans. The best part about Fade from Memory is that it also triggers Ketramose if done on your turn, netting you an extra card in the process. Alongside normal cycling, a bunch of cards also have land cycling, which lets you search for a land in your library instead of drawing a card. There are a few, like Timeless Dragon, that have plains cycling, which lets you search for a plains card and put it into your hand. The most important aspect of these cards is that they simply say plains card, not basic plains card, meaning you could get a dual land with these, greatly helping you fix your mana if need be. Beyond that, Angel of the Ruins and Alabaster Host Intercessor can act as great removal spells that also happen to trigger Ketramose. Gleam of Resistance, Shardless Outlander, and Absorb Vis all have basic land cycling, which means you must search specifically for a basic when cycled. These cards aren't really great outside of their cycling ability, especially for how high their CMCs are, but they do act as efficient ramp and mana fixing for the deck. For our removal package, there are actually a decent number that have cycling, especially when it comes to board wipes. Decree of Pain is probably the most well-known one, even though its cycling ability may not be a full board wipe in certain situations. Dismantling Wave is actually the opposite, where it wipes all artifacts and enchantments only if it's cycled, rather than just one from each opponent. Akroma's Vengeance is basically a combination of the two, destroying all creatures, artifacts, and enchantments when cast normally, but doesn't have a cycling payoff like either other one does. That's not necessarily a bad thing, however. Sometimes you just want to cycle normally to trigger some other effect you have on the field. As far as normal removal goes, we want to focus on ones at exile, since we could both trigger Ketramose's effect with them while also adding to the exile count for him to attack or block. In typical white deck fashion, Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile shine in this regard, showcasing yet again why they are some of the best spot removal in the game. We also have Anguished Unmaking, which can exile any non-land permanent, all for a low cost of 3 mana and 3 life. Now for the elephant in the room, tutors. Since we're basically playing a hidden commander in the form of Astral Slide and Astral Drift, we need to make sure we can consistently get access to them, or at least have a better chance at getting them. The best way to do this is with tutors. Since we're in black and white, we basically have the best tutors in the game. Demonic Tutor needs no real introduction, as it's considered pretty much the best one out there. Enlightened Tutor and Idyllic Tutor can only grab enchantments or artifacts, but are exactly what we need them to do in the deck. I know that there's some animosity towards tutors, but in a deck like this, you really do need them for it to function. In situations like this, where you're playing with a hidden commander and aren't getting some infinite combo pieces out of your deck, I think tutors are perfectly acceptable to play. Finally, there are a number of utility cards that work well with the overall cycling theme. Shadow of the Grave will let you get back all cards you cycled in that turn, meaning if you're able to sling through a good number of them, you could get them back and do it all over again. Herald of the Forgotten does something similar, getting back any permanents with cycling from the graveyard. This will be especially great after something like a board wipe that takes out all your cycling payoff creatures, making it like nothing ever happened. Abandoned Sarcophagus lets you get the best of both worlds. It'll let you cycle the cards and then use their actual effect from the graveyard. It even exiles cycling cards in certain situations, which could also potentially trigger Ketramose. Last but certainly not least, no cycling deck would be without the absolute best cycling card out there, Fluctuator. Fluctuator reduces all cycling costs by 2 generic mana, which, in quite a number of cases, is exactly what the cycling cost of the card is. Cycling being completely free, or even heavily reduced in cases where there are colored pips in the cost, is such a game changer that it can completely reshape the state of the game. Imagine being able to cycle through 7+ cards in a turn with Astral Slide out. Not only will you likely clear the way of your opponent's creatures while also drawing 7+ cards, you'll also have enough cards in exile to let Ketramose attack. The sky's really the limit when it comes to Fluctuator in a deck like this. Here's an example deck list utilizing all the previously mentioned cards. Additional cards include more cycling cards with a plethora of lands that have cycling on them, cycle payoff cards in Dirge of Dread and Hollow One, and additional exile-based removal in Utter End and Return to Dust. I can say from personal experience that Astral Slide based decks are extremely fun to play. In fact, I'm pretty much always looking for new commanders that work well with the card. Previously, I've had both Azure the Enchanter and War Doctor and Clara Oswald Astral Slide based cycling deck. Azure is kind of the default go-to for the theme, as he can easily tutor up the Astral card with his ability. The War Doctor was more of a win con in his deck, getting more and more time counters on him the more creatures were slid out, before attacking and one-shotting 2 opponents with Clara's doubling effect. Ketramose sits somewhere between these 2 commanders, I'd say. He can be a great win con due to his evasiveness and survivability in combat, while also being an extremely potent value engine with his card draw. The reason why I really like Ketramose with this theme is due to one single concept: card advantage. See, with cycling decks, you don't really get card advantage, you get card parity. You discard 1 card, the one with cycling, and draw a card. You don't go up in cards with this transaction, you stay at the same number. This can be a real issue with cycling decks, since there are naturally going to be cards you want to play, ever decreasing your hand, while not ever really increasing it. With Ketramose's ability, this is no longer as much of an issue, since with Astral Slide out, cycling on your turn will let you draw 2 cards, increasing your hand by 1. Will Ketramose become more popular than Zur for this deck? Honestly, probably not. You're extremely dependent on Astral Slide with Ketramose, with no real way to get access to it outside of drawing it or a tutor naturally. Whereas Zur can not only tutor up the Astral cards, but also some of the best payoff cards, like Faith of the Devoted and Drakehaven, letting you more easily close out the game. That doesn't mean Ketramose can't work, however. It just may not be as efficient at first. But once you do have an Astral out, that's where Ketramose really shines. It would become far more useful than Zur is at that point. Honestly, I'd implore all of you to just try out an Astral Slide based cycling deck, whether it's Ketramose or Zur, as they're such fun and unique decks that there's no way you won't have a blast playing them. I know I certainly have. I hope you enjoyed watching this deck tech on Ketramose the New Dawn. The full deck list outlined in this video can be found at the Architect link at the top of the description. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to drop a like and comment, as well as subscribe to the channel for more Magic content. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.